guests that are with me, and I'll introduce them one by one, and then we'll get into the panel. First, we have Tiana Taylor. Then we have Benicio Del Toro. Leonardo DiCaprio. Chase Infinity. And Paul Thomas Anderson. I think we're going to pass this mic down to Perfidia. Oh, maybe I'm supposed to be sitting there. Let's do this very elegantly. I'm going to switch it.
I know I ran away, but damn.
You want to switch? Let's switch. No musical chairs in the morning.
Bob and Sensei moving tables and stuff like that. They're back.
I just want to thank you all for this film. I saw it about, 6 days ago, and it's just been rattling around in my mind since. I think like many people in this room, I feel an exhaustion with being a citizen of this country right now, of being someone who loves movies and feeling like everything is in a half days. But when I walked out of one battle after another, I just felt like very wired. And so this is personally for me like a dream scenario to get to talk to you all about this film, which is an odyssey, of course, between the characters Bob and Willa. Bob trying to save Willa, but it's also an odyssey through various American traditions, which include fascism, which include countercultural movements, which include paranoia, which also include entertainment. I think when you walk out of this film, and maybe you're all feeling this right now, you're thinking about how it is sort of casting the whole century of American cinema within a certain light. I want to start with the writing, Paul, because it all begins with the story. Vineland is a novel by Pynchon, which came out in 1990, and it was kind of pilloried when it came out. People didn't really like it. So how did you know that this was going to be the launching pad for this story that you wanted to tell? And maybe you can tell us about the process of adapting and of invention.
Well, he's one of my favorite writers, and it's a very beautiful book, but it's very challenging. And among a million other things that it does and talks about, at its center it has a terrific story about these countercultural revolutionaries who moved to the Northern California woods. So the bones are the same. That premise of a father taking care of a daughter, a long-lost mother, and a bad guy in pursuit is the same. The details within it are very different. So I've been very faithful in my adaptation of Inherent Vice, and I found it very difficult to make a faithful adaptation of Vineland. So I just did what you're supposed to do, as any good writer should do, which is steal the parts that you need and then run as fast as you can in a new direction. And quite honestly, that's what it was, to change their names, to make them my own, to kind of use it as a jumping off point, to not, in a way, the best way to be respectful to that book was to disrespect it, if that makes sense at all.
Which Pynchon would love.
I think so. I think so. Yeah. So that's one element of starting the story. as any writer here who does that might know, that you generally can have a great idea over here, a great idea over here, and they're just kind of waiting to kind of gather some momentum, and maybe they do, maybe they don't, but if you keep your notebooks, if you kind of keep to ideas, or even if you remember things, that's generally a good sign over the years that it meant something, you know. And from time to time you get lucky to open an old notebook and something helps you keep going. Anyway, it's a very long-winded way to say that on and off over the years I've been writing a story, and I suppose it becomes a different story as you start to have kids. You start to write and think about it in a different way. Yeah.
I'm curious about, for the performers on stage, how you felt when you received the script. We're in the moment, right, where the film exists. It's in the world. It has its own identity, but you were there before that, and I imagine it must feel, I don't know, there's just that private place that you're in when you're a reader, and you're just with the writer, and you're just with the words, and you can't see the story yet. So maybe if you could all tell me a little bit about your impression of this story before you went on set.
Me first, okay. My first impression of the story was just getting to honestly workshop it with Paul and with Leo. And is it working or not? Ish. Thank you. Yeah, getting to workshop Bob and Willa's story, and Willa and Deandra's story with Paul, and then Regina, who's not here, and then with Leo. And I had done months and months of chemistry reads and callbacks, but it wasn't until close I found out that I got the part that I got to read the script, and my mind was like blown reading it. And I remember Paul handed it to me and was like, okay, you're gonna read the script, and then just tell me when you're done and I'll be right back. And I was like, oh my God, you're just leaving me with the script to read the full thing, and that was it. And yeah, my mind was just blown at the scope of the world, and then how human all of the characters were and how distinctly different they all were. And then getting to see everybody bring them on screen and in person and embody the physicality of it was even more beautiful. So
yeah, for me it was well, first off, you get a script by Paul Thomas Anderson, your eyes sort of light up. But the fact that this was, you know, written for the past 15 to 20 years, and it's coming out at a time of such polarity in our country, and the fact that the heart of it is this father-daughter relationship. Paul gave me this book called Days of Rage very early on, and I realized that a lot of this was based on revolutionary groups of the late 1960s, the Weather Underground, and it was fascinating to see how that people who had specific intentions politically sort of imploded in on themselves, how they scattered around like rats around the country. And you know, when we got to Eureka, in Northern California, I sort of picked up on the culture of who Bob was, this sort of paranoia about him. But he was still somewhat idealistic, and then he's faced with saving this daughter, but he's living in a state of constant paranoia. I just thought, what a fascinating centerpiece for this story. In the beginning, Bob is kind of an extra. He's watching Perfidia go to these extremes. There's that amazing sequence that she does in the bank robbery sequence where you see, you know, they have their political ideology, but what are you faced with in this moment? Violence. And the fact that Bob is sort of picking up the pieces of all that carnage was just an incredible centerpiece for a story. And you know, and the great thing about working with Paul, you know, and I would imagine if I was a writer-director, I wouldn't be as malleable or as flexible as he is, but all of us came in with our own ideas, our own feeling of understanding the identity of these characters, and he was willing to make these changes and adapt. For something that he'd been thinking about for 15 or 20 years, it was a testament to his ability to work with actors that was really fantastic.
I got a call from Paul. I've worked with Paul before. He told me he had this story, he had this character, told me a little bit about the character. I don't recall that much. I know the character was a karate instructor. But when Paul Thomas Anderson calls you, doesn't matter who you are or where you are, you say yes. So I immediately said yes, and he said he was gonna send me the script. Instead, he sent me a photograph of a poster of a tiger dressed in a judo kimono. And somehow it did make sense. After I read the script, it's like some kind of heroic creature, a good friend, just like tigers, man's best friend. Hey, they don't change their stripes.
Was the tiger standing, or was it like down with the kimono?
Standing.
Oh. Oh my goodness. I thought it was like.
I think he was cross-armed, right? Arms folded.
I want to see that. Send that to me.
I gotta find it, but it's in the books.
No, that's great. But yeah, what I love most about the experience is I think before I ever even read the script, I had the honor of being able to have a conversation with Paul. So I think going into the script, you're ready because now you're excited. So when you're reading it, I could like literally see it playing out. Of course, it hits different when you actually watching it on a screen, but I love when I can see it happening while I'm reading, because other than that, it will go through one eye and out the other, and I'm already blind, so I just be looking at the paper like, so I have to see it, I have to feel it, I have to be excited about it, and it was amazing, to see Perfidia and how unapologetically herself that she was at any expense. She didn't care what that meant, so it was inspiring to read the different characters, and like Regina would say, a lot of the moments being to be determined, to be determined chaos, all of that is kind of like, okay, well, what's happening here, But he did have a version where it was like, he's going, I don't even know how he was able to spell it, but he actually had a version of chaos that was written all the way out, and I was like, okay, now I see why you put the to be determined on here. Let's just do the to be determined chaos, cool, we'll just get there when we get there. But no, it's an honor, and like Benicio said, when Paul called, you go and you say yes, and I didn't really need a script to jump on board.
Paul, I want to talk about the visuals of the film, because there is a quality, I think, that viewers in the room probably feel of like something close to the uncanny. We feel that we're in this country that is our own, but it's like slightly skewed or heightened or magnified or intensified or sometimes even like dampened. A huge motif of this film is being underground often, right? You're talking about the weather underground, Leo. It's also like actually one of the worlds that people inhabit. So how is it working with your cinematographer and production design to figure out how you wanted this world to be of its own, but also to reflect ours?
That's a good question. I mean, the story leads the way, and the premise that you have a first act, this insane first act that goes all these, it mostly kind of an urban area, the majority of it, but little excursions out here, and they're obviously starting on the border. So those are the things of the story. So then, right, how are we going to do this? What does it mean? The scouting of the movie determined the shots for the movie. You can think as a writer, okay, you kind of step back and you go, wow, we start in the woods. We're starting in these, Jurassic era woods, right? With these trees that have been there, what, thousands, hundreds of thousands of years? You'll know better than anybody. But he wasn't there when they were named. He's an expert on this kind of stuff. But the point is that you start when we pick up with them, now you're in the woods, and you're going to get to the desert, you're going to come through rolling hills. This is a kind of California landscape, and the scouting of the movie is what determined the visual language. Scouting over and over again, looking for things, looking for Bob and Willa's house, thinking in a very practical way. What is a city where we can get a lot of bang for our buck? I mean, it is very practical. We ended up in Sacramento, which has fantastic urban streets, great great visual energy. I mean, it could be the streets of Detroit, it could be the streets of Sacramento, it could be the streets of Newark. You know, it kind of had a really kind of anywhere USA downtown feel, without being too specific. That was exciting. But the scouting of the movie determined the visual language. There was never a kind of predetermined thought, and it was just like, the script was strong. Tell the story. Don't get gourmet. Don't get too fussy. Make the shots that tell the story, because there's so much story to tell. There's no room for a kind of decorations on top or powdered sugar on it. It has to be very economical. And yeah, it's also kind of starts to inform the way that you work, you know, it means that when you go to work, you have a lot of work to do in a day, which is good. It keeps momentum moving, you know, you never slow down. So you're not getting fussy about anything, if that makes sense. And that's kind of where the visual language comes in, you know, from the story, and then the practical reality of telling it. No, if anything, maybe to that point, you're trying to desperately try to stay away from something that's too manicured or thought out, you know? You're just trying to tell the audience the story as swiftly and as economically as possible. But of course, it's impossible not to, you know, you end up at a, you know, rendezvous point that's the Sisters of the Brave Beaver. You're like, okay, well, there's some visual opportunities here. We can't run away from those. Let's indulge in those. You know, there's wonderful California missions. We were up in San Juan Bautista. We ended up in Lompoc, Purísima, which is where the chapel is. You know, those things kind of reveal themselves in the writing, and then it kind of makes for an exciting, dramatic moment when she's going to finally square off with Lockjaw. And you go, oh, maybe it's time for one of those big old-fashioned grand movie shots. You know, go up on the stairs and look down and see the face-off between our hero and our villain. So, you know, you take advantage of those moments when they come, but you try not to really rely on them.
I'd like to get into the relationships between the characters, because, as you said, this script is an epic. In some ways, it's like a founding myth. It feels like an America founding myth kind of film. We're dealing with maternity, with paternity, the child, right? These are like very essential to our idea of how the notion of this country is very tied to the idea of family and to the propulsion of it. And so that hinges on relationships, and we have various like permutations of relationships on this stage. I'd like to start with who it begins with, which is Perfidia and Bob. Perfidia, when we meet her, immediately in my mind I was just thinking of like blaxploitation, you know, Athena's. She just has that kind of coffee vibe, and then her character kind of melts into a depression, a postpartum depression, and then of course is spirited away from the screen, but is kind of the aura over everything. When you two were figuring out your relationship as characters, Leo and Tayana, can you maybe tell me more about that? Like how her absence affects Bob through the majority of the film, and how her short presence, I think, how you decided to work through that in the opening sequence.
She said, speak on my absence.
No, like I said earlier, that she leaves a wake of carnage for every single character in the movie, and we're picking up the pieces. And I just love the connection that they have early on. They're both idealistic. They have their sense of they have a revolutionary spirit in them, but the harsh reality of this child comes into play, and the future of the next generation. And I just love the fact that Paul set up this dynamic between the two characters where I'm picking up the pieces, and then you flash 16 years later, and we had a lot of these chemistry reads, and there's a father trying to relate to the next generation, and there's a disconnect between them. It's not sort of wholesome, happy villager sequence. He's arguing with his daughter. She's not understanding him. He's paranoid. And then the next generation goes on. But yeah, like I said, Perfidia is just, you know, a lightning rod of a character. She affects everyone in the entire film.
Yeah, we'll also say, like you hit on earlier, which I think is important. I think you see this woman in survival mode, and we've all been there before. And I also think you see this woman in survival mode dealing with postpartum depression. And I think where her and Bob disconnect is Bob is not hearing the cries. He's not hearing the cries for help. You know, you see that moment where Bob is about to go through the door, then he chooses not to. And then you see the results of that. You see the results of maybe I shouldn't have walked in. You know, you see the result and it's like, okay, if she has to walk away, I maybe need to actually let her do that, you know? And I think that's what's beautiful that you get to kind of see in those little nuggets that you get to take from the movie. I also think that even 16 years later, Willa is going through, you know, kind of like our baggage, you know, like what we left, like our past is coming to haunt not only Bob, but his only child, you know, and Bob and Perfidia is really the result of this battle that Willa has to go through.
Right. I mean, Willa is such a fascinating character because she's brought to the sanctuary city for her protection, but another thing that's done for her protection is that she doesn't know who she is. Even her name is a fiction. She has a name of a dead person. And I'm actually really fascinated in the relationship between Willa and Sensei, because Sensei kind of, there's so much history clearly behind Sensei's character that you don't really have to tell us. It just unfurls in the scenes where we see him helping people who are being, you know, chased by the police because of their immigration status. But Sensei is kind of like the effective father or a surrogate father figure for Willa because Bob is so paralyzed by his grief and his indecision. So when you two were figuring out that relationship, what was it like, I guess, loading the character with all this like half knowledge and making sure that it comes up across on the screen?
I just jumped in real quick, but right at the beginning when I was talking to Paul about the movie, I remember going to visit Willa Chase at the dojo. And she was doing her karate. She was already much better than her teachers. And so that was kind of like, that's kind of like started something in there. But I think it's on the writing there of, you know, Sensei is just this, you know, a friend of a friend, you know, he's a friend. And also the fact that, you know, he's got this Harriet Tubman situation, no money, clean. And he's not doing it for money, altruistic. And I think that, you know, says a lot about who he is and who he is as a coach for Willa and Chase's character. And so it does, we just had one little moment where I tell her to breathe. Yeah. And what was really impressive for me was that over the years of making many movies, I've been doing this for a long time. And usually it takes a long time to create a kind of like some rapport between yourself and the director. Kind of like the pitching coach and the pitcher. You work on signs. Do it again. Okay. And it was amazing to see Chase and Paul like in the zone. And I just showed up, and I felt like, you know, this girl has never worked before. Give me a break. They were on a sign language situation that was beautiful and really strong, and I think it shows in the film. This, you know, she's super strong as a first-time actress in the movie. Thank you.
Thank you, Sensei. was saying, we only had really one time on screen together, and I had met him briefly when I was doing my karate lessons, but also at that point I didn't know I had the job yet. And I was doing these lessons, and while reading the script and having these conversations with Paul, I really wanted to hone in on the fact that, like you were saying, that Sensei to Willa is everything that Bob is not. He is secure, he is sure of himself, he is confident, he's calm, not paranoid, and is teaching her very valuable lessons about managing herself and managing the world around her. And I, at least for that, the relationship between the two of us, whether or not me and Benicio having conversations or me and Paul, a lot of that again was in Paul's writing.
It's a good question because yeah, it all kind of comes out in the car there when Bob learns that she has a phone and he's told by Sensei. You know, we knew that was a big moment, really, for Bob more than anything else, to hear this information from one of his peers. You know, man, I mean, that's a big one for Bob, to kind of reinforce just how absent, just how frozen he is. And to your point, yeah, there's a real heroic story for Bob, but it's not on camera. You know, it's those initial years of raising this child, but that at a certain point, yes, you're right, she's a hostage to this situation, and he's just too stuck to let her go, let her fly free.
Yeah. And there's a way in which his movement is instigated by Lockjaw, right? Like, Lockjaw gets him out of this house. It's kind of inspirational when you look at it that way. But they're very Janice-headed, these two characters, and I think I'm so curious to see how the public is going to maybe kind of like read their own situation with respect to what's happening to American politics onto these two characters. And I was wondering, Paul and Leo, if, and I know you were thinking about this, right, as the film is just right on the precipice of like being seen. How do you feel about those projections? Because ultimately, yes, there is mirroring, there is topicality, but this is a story, and that's something that you want to sort of protect. So, you know.
Well, yeah, of course, we live in this world, and we're not blind, and we're not too dumb, but to your point, yeah, what you have to do is really focus on something that you can hold in your hand. You can't try to wrap your arms around the world, or you can't try and wrap your arms, or an audience is not really interested in a big topic, you know, that is not cinematic for very long, right? But what can we understand? There's things that you have to narrow it down to. You have to kind of blur focus on everything and focus on the things that matter. I know what I can relate to. I can relate to Bob. I can relate to Willa. I have to stretch a little bit to understand Perfidia. I can try and get there, but that's what I have her for, you know? And when you deal with small things that you can hold in your hand, hopefully then those things that you had to throw out of focus can become the background. You know, obviously they come into focus in the background, but if they dominate your story, I think an audience will lose interest, and I think I would lose interest. It's not a playable thing, you know. A heart is a playable thing. A motivation, your feeling, a feeling is a playable thing. Details about the world kind of become unplayable at a certain point. You know, they all narrow down to who do I love and how am I going to try to protect them. So that's an approach. I don't know if it's the right one, but it's certainly the one that we took and that felt right. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I just thought when I read the script, you just did a beautiful job of seamlessly weaving in this political extremism that's going on in our world right now, this sort of mirror to society, this idea that we're in such a polarized world and everyone's trying to belong somehow. You even see Lockjaw and this idea of the Christmas Adventurers Club, which is the most insane sort of Masonic racist cult you could ever imagine, but you still say, does something like this really exist in society? Is there a place, this underground world with these foul and these men talking about cleansing society? Oh Jesus, there's something tactile about that that's so scary and felt so real, but all within the context of that, he made this incredible sort of epic story of people trying to find, and certainly in these three characters, loving their neighbor, loving somebody in their community. This character here, with what he's doing with the Harriet Tubman Immigration Center in his house, he's doing it, like Benicio said, from his heart. It's altruistic, and he takes it upon himself to help this father and daughter, and there's just a tremendous amount of humanity in those characters. And I hate to say a film has a message, you know, and Paul's, you know, not a writer-director that likes to make films that have a message, but if, for me, there's an undercurrent of being good to one another, of helping each other out in the hardest and most polarized times. These people are helping each other, and I thought that was a beautiful thing.
That's a really wonderful note to end on. I think maybe one thing that I'm saying that we're ending, and yet I keep talking, but something that I felt as an audience member and as a critic, you know, it's my job to kind of just like go in very soldierly and watch things and experience things and like come out with an opinion, was feeling humanized as a viewer, like not feeling that I was being condescended to or that I was being patronized, and also doing it in an idiom that like we all love, which is action, which is the thriller, which is a very American genre. And I think there's a real dignifying of the popcorn thrill that you feel when you watch this film, and I'm just so happy, like overjoyed that we can get to that again, because it feels like something that the industry wants to take away from us altogether. So
I want to take you with me everywhere I go.
so yeah, I guess we're done. I want to thank you all for talking with me and for the film.
Thank you for how you speak about the film. Really amazing. Another way to say it, we were joking backstage, is it's an action comedy with a side of postpartum depression. We've got everything for you. Tell your friends. If you like your postpartum depression movies, we've got it. We've got car chases. You said it better than I did. Thank you.